stealing ideas from Egypt, which I know you were not, but others have, then you really have to show influence is something, and to continue to encourage others to work on that.
You want to follow up on your question? You get to ask Professor Clarke a question. Yeah.
I hardly know where to begin. One thing I'm curious about, I had a quick look actually at the introduction to the second edition of Bradley's The Iceman Inheritance, a very interesting book with a lot of interesting hypotheses about the origins of cultures and civilizations. Professor Clarke wrote an introduction to the second edition to it, in which he stated that the first show of European literary intelligence surfaced around 1250 BCE with the publication of two books of folklore, the Odyssey and the Iliad. And that struck me as somewhat curious because, in fact, as far as most scholars seem to be able to tell, the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed actually orally and didn't reach a literary form, if you mean by that a written form, until probably the 6th century BCE in Athens. There are obviously texts from Mycenae and Crete and elsewhere with real Greek in a literary form from before 1250, in fact, going back probably to 1600 or so. But this has significant implications for the idea, which some scholars have put forth, that Egyptian language was deeply influential on the first form of Greek that we have, that is the Linear B tablets.
So I'm awaiting the question.
That is my question. Professor Clarke has stated that this is the first form of literary intelligence that surfaced around 1250, and in fact, it did not, and I'm curious how he is maintaining that.
All right.
It is the first book, and it's a book of folklore, and we really don't know whether Homer wrote it or whether Homer was man or woman. It's the first book to become known, basic to the West, in a form that we could study and conjecture about, and it emerged at the time Europe was beginning to show some intellectual maturity. And if you deal with this, you have to deal with what Professor Leslie accused me of, not paying attention to historical chronology. And if she read any of my texts, any of my numerous guides and curriculars and lecture notes, you know that I'm a specialist on chronology. I know that one comes first and two come second. But what I was trying to get across is that in the 8th century to the 12th century, so the intellectual emergence of Europe, at a time Egypt was in its 23rd dynasty and dying after nearly 10,000 years of some forms of organized society. Europe intellectually was just being born. And I further maintain that Europe in general had nothing to do with the creation of Rome and Greece, and yet the challenge of Rome and Greece created Europe because they were scattered tribes, and the challenge of Rome and Greece brought them together, and they became a people strong enough to create a state. If anybody got any information to the contrary, state the information to the contrary. I maintain that there was no Europe. You're giving Europe credit for things that happened before the first European wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. And I'm saying that you have not read, not just Massey, Joe Massey, his European disciple, Churchward, Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, the Origins of Religions, and his extensive work on Freemasonry. We've not read the American disciple of Massey, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, is who is this King of Glory, one of the best written books on the Christ story, when he proves that the basis of European spirituality was taken directly from Africa.
Professor Rogers, would you like to follow on your question?